Well, thanks, Chris, for meeting me today. Really excited about this. I think it's been a while we'll be talking about this, and just to give everybody else a little bit of background and context, Chris was one of my predecessors as a NBAA top 40 under 40. I'm really honored to be able to talk to you today because, I mean, you've inspired me a lot in the work that you do. But I think that we share a lot of our passions, not only in aviation, but in the work that we do, how we come to that work, and pour everything that we are, like our skills and our knowledge, into doing the best that we can. But before we get into the meat of the subject, I just wanted to ask you more about yourself. Tell me a little bit more about your background in aviation and how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my aviation journey probably wasn't like most people, where they sit outside their local airport and watch airplanes take off. My background really started. I flew in the military in the Army. Actually, I flew helicopters, flew UH60 Blackhawks. Went to Afghanistan on a combat deployment, flying medevac. So that was that, and then got into the business of aviation back in 2011, 2012. And then from there, aircraft brokerage, sales, in the 135 world, and then ultimately got into the marketing and advertising type world. And so that's my aviation background.
So you've done a little bit of everything from helicopters to airplanes to medevac to Part 135. Can you just expand on what 135 means, just for the ones who aren't aware of the term?
Yeah, so operating, charter on demand, non-scheduled type flights, so business charters typically is what we've done. There's been personal travel in there as well, but that's typically what we do for our charter certificate.
And that's awesome. So tell me more about your time flying Blackhawks. How was that? Like, you must have seen some pretty crazy stuff there.
Flying Blackhawks was amazing in the Army, and an amazing opportunity. And then flying medevac in Afghanistan was certainly an experience that I don't think will be rivaled from anything else, just because the nature of the job. It was, anytime a medevac mission is launched, it's somebody's in danger of life, limb, or eyesight, and it's a 0 to 100 miles an hour in a blink of an eye, because in the U.S. we have, anytime a medevac call is done, you have what you consider a golden hour. So you have an hour to reach that patient, that casualty, and bring him back to a point of care within that hour. So it's a very, very high intensity, fast paced, rapid turnaround, rapid mission. So.
So I flew medevac. Now, it wasn't anything like flying on Blackhawk, I have to say. I flew PC-12NGs up in Northern Ontario. And some of them were, I want to call them like run-of-the-mill kind of thing. We had more regular transfers that weren't so critical. But I have come across a couple of them which were pretty intense, and the whole family shows up. And it wasn't like military or personnel. It was often, family member, some kids sometimes. Like, I remember there were emotions ran high, I don't want to say, sometimes, as much as they try to pretend that as pilots, we're up there just being not robots, but doing our program duty. I'm sure that you came across it, especially flying in Afghanistan, times where you had to deal with not only like flying the helicopter part, but maybe managing yourself or your team through the crisis. Like, was there anything that you can relate that would be, that you can think of?
Yeah. So, with us, it was all our missions were point of injury. We weren't doing the transfers. We were doing it at the POI, which is, again, the point of injury. Sorry, tongue tied there. And, we had a crew of, you had another pilot, and you had two crew members in the back, usually one crew chief, one medic, sometimes a en route critical care nurse, depending on the rotation. And Yeah, when you get in those missions, very early on, I learned, and I was told from one of the senior pilots and leadership in our unit that just you can't get personal with the patient,
Mm,
like learning names or anything like that, because then it's just it's really hard and it just starts to hit close to home. So you try
yeah,
and just lock in and do your job and keep the team focused. Again, we have flying in those environments too. I mean, you have um, a lot of things outside of the cockpit, that can affect your flight, whether it's weather, enemy activity in the area, the airspace itself. Because again, when you're in a theater like that, you have multiple elements, multiple agencies that are all trying to deconflict to make sure that your airway and your routes are
yeah,
clear. You're monitoring several radios, not just a couple between the ground force elements, the ground commander, your home units, whoever's controlling you in that sector. It's a lot
hmm
to kind of take in, and then throw in the fact that you may be illumination at night's really bad. You're under NVGs.
well,
Just a lot of factors that come into
yeah.
play that on the civilian side, fortunately, people don't have to deal with a lot of those extra stressors, which can escalate a situation.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, so between and here I'm just putting on my like sort of like CRM teacher or threat and their management teacher hat. But I hear, you talk of like all these external threats that we face, and I mean, for regular like Part 135 or charter pilot, like you did are still doing, or like I do, I feel like we deal with weather and we deal with external agencies that may be there to help us or hinder us, or both sometimes, depending on the scenario. But often I feel, to me, that those things can be, we can learn to manage them, we can learn to prepare for them as much as we can and deal with them. And I mean, to some extent, I guess they're out of our control too, right?
Mhm.
But we have to learn to trust them to do their work. But often I found that the person that's, or the threat that's going to be the most dangerous to any flight is the guy right here. And sometimes, like, and it's not necessarily a threat, but like the most prone to error and problems, right? So how do you deal with that? Because you said something that's pretty that rings back to my medevac days, like when they teach us like don't get attached to the people,
Mhm.
don't get personal. And for us, I remember that in my time flying medevac, like they had to put some pretty stringent procedures to prevent that from happening. When we started taking phone calls and receiving details, they wouldn't tell us anything. After a while, it just became, here's the patient weight. So we didn't know, was it a kid, was it an adult? Because sometimes like if it was a kid and you had any details about what happened, you're like, oh, I have to make this work, or I have to get this kid wherever he needs to get, because
Yeah.
like this is hitting too close to home. So I found that dealing with these more personal or people issues, where at times the hardest part of my job, and it wasn't necessarily me, but sometimes it could be like the dynamic and trying to make sure that the job got done well, and having the mental fortitude or the emotional like strength to be able to say like, what you just said right now is absolutely not okay, but we got to put that on the side and just keep going at it. But how's how's your time there flying those Blackhawks? Like, I'm curious as to like to the CRM sort of culture or the interpersonal culture that was there, and how that affected your ability to do your work well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and obviously there was a lot, with the safety officers, the chain of commands, everybody, the CRM and the risk mitigation. We absolutely before, because as you get into the theater and you start to assume command of the region and where you're going to start operating, there's a whole handoff period, and you
Okay.
kind of take what the previous unit did for your CRM, and then you adapt it to your unit. So again, there's a lot of
Okay.
things that come into play And it's dynamic too. You set it, and then you adjust the plan as you get more experience and you do more missions. So crew mix is certainly a knowing your people. Being a good leader, knowing your people, how they operate, the interpersonal skills. Who's very experienced. Weighing experience versus other just interpersonal type skills. It's always a constant juggle. And monitoring your people throughout that situation, because again, it's a year-long deployment and it's very long, and people get worn out, especially seeing traumatic events and traumatic injuries over and over and over again. So you just have to be part of being a good leader is managing your most valuable resource, and that is people. So yeah, there's a lot to go into, again, planning the CRM risk mitigation. Obviously, there's depending on the lunar cycle where we had 0 loom, and you're flying under goggles with no loom, that changes who your crew mix is. Or if you have certain weather conditions where, the ceiling's a little lower, you've got to swap out some pilots there to make sure that your crew mix, whether it's based off of, total time or, the medic's abilities in the back, it all kind of fluxes with what the specific mission is. So when you get the call, it's called a 9-line. We get, and again with medevac in theater in the military, you pick up both friendly and enemy forces. It doesn't matter. Your job is to save a life at that point. But you get it's hard to say that you don't get a little extra pep in your step when you hear it's a U.S. force or a NATO ally or a child. Because unfortunately there were a lot of those type calls and those missions that happened that you get a little pep in your step. But really, I think as the pilot in command, you've got to realize that you're no good to your crew if you can't do your mission and you can't focus at the task at hand. So knowing that you've drilled and you've trained everything that you need to do to physically fly the airplane, your focus now is making sure that you're taking in the environmental conditions, you're taking in any threats, and you're managing that for your crew because you want them to be able to do your job. The more times than not, the crew chief ended up getting, instead of being, his eyes outside, providing external security, after we picked up the casualty, they're inside helping the medic because the trauma is pretty severe and the medic needs that help. Or we have, you get the call for one casualty and it ends up being 2. So now you're having to manage all those changes kind of on the fly. And then obviously, your job as a pilot up front is, you put on your Joe Cool hat, your voice inflection, your tone does a lot for your crew because, things get pretty intense in the back, especially as conditions, kind of worsen in the back because of casualties. And, you try and put out the sights and the smells and those types of things. You try and zone those out just to focus on doing your mission. And your adrenaline again is so through the roof that I don't know if tunnel vision's the right word, but you get so dialed in to the job. At least that's where I did. I got to the point where I was so dialed in that it was almost everything was like almost happening in slow motion because you're
Would you call that like? Do you think it would be like what they call, I guess, like athletes call it, like being the flow kind of thing?
In the flow state or in the zone? Yeah, it was. I mean, it definitely got to a point throughout the year where every time we did a mission, it was like you were in the zone because the crew and the crew coordination, and just the mechanical movements of flying the aircraft. You get to learn the operating area. Area of operations and things, you get more familiar with it. So your attention can start to get more dialed into other areas. I think everybody gets kind of in that rhythm where they catch their stride and they really get into the zone. And that's really, I think, where we operate at our best. And then again, obviously you have everything like ebbs and flows, in the beginning, there's a steep learning curve. And then towards the end, people start to get burned out and you've got to try and fight that when they know you're at the tail end of your deployment. So things can maybe get a little laxed, but that's where, rotating people out, medics, we had to rotate quite frequently because of, again, just the medics and crew chiefs, we had to rotate out just because of the level of trauma they were seeing consistently. You can,
Yeah.
we were definitely noticing that impact it was taking on people. And again, we're, as pilots and myself, again, we're not impervious to that. A lot of that stuff, I think, in full disclosure, I packed down deep and never really processed myself. And maybe that's why, like post deployment, you have a lot of those things that start to unpack that you have to constantly work through. And I, still work through a lot of that stuff. So.
Yeah. No, I can totally. I mean, like I said, we're all human, right? And to the core, like these are the things that will get us going. I think, I don't know if you could hear my kid running in the back. One of the things that I remember learning is the word, like the base of the word, like emotions, which is like energy in motion, which is really like the flux of everything that goes on, and being able to, like you said, at some point they have to be kind of put down, but they're just going to come back. There's energy packed, like the kinetic energy that just needs to be released eventually into those things. So I can understand that. Now, quick aside, because you said something that made me laugh, but you talked about the cool voice, like you put your Joe Cool voice on, and honestly, I recently heard Chris Voss, which is an FBI hostage negotiator.
Yep, negotiator.
Yeah. So have you read his last book, How to Negotiate Like Your Life Depends on It? I think it's called.
I've not read that one. I've never split the difference. I've read that one, not read his second book.
Yeah. Okay. So Never Split the Difference was a great book, and I remember him talking about the different tones of voice, and there's a radio commentator with a calm, cool voice, and then there's like the friendly voice, and to me, like, I mean, he applies them in the context of negotiating, but it was sort of like almost a eureka moment for me in terms of like even flying, where I realized how many times do we change the tone of our voice depending on the thing that we're trying to get accomplished. And like you said, most of the time I feel like it's the sort of the cool voice or the friendly voice, we're friendly together. And then every once in a while, like it'll be like the flat, deep tone voice that has to come out to be like, this is the way it needs to be. And then you have kids, right?
Yeah.
I remember. Okay, so like I don't know if you've ever tried that on them, but I love seeing the difference between two, and I can tell like how my 5-year-old will react to that voice coming out, whereas and sometimes it's like the snappy voice that needs to come out. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like they said, that having that relaxed voice again, because you're talking to your medic and your crew chief in your back, because you're trying to monitor the situation, because again, as you're flying through, most of the time you're cleared direct back to the cache, the combat support hospital. But there's some times that you can hear in their breathing, because again, internally on the ICS, we can hear quite a bit, and when you can tell that stuff's they're getting a little overworked in the back. It's almost like being task saturated, like in the cockpit. Like if you all of a sudden went inadvertent, right? Like there's a lot of stuff you've got to quickly do, right? Same, they deal with the same thing in the back. They're trying to stabilize a patient, and things can start to go south quickly. So they're breathing, the way they're talking, because the way our medics they were great. They were great about talking to the crew chief and having that crew coordination of, hey, this is what we're doing. Because at certain parts too, we got to stop doing evasive maneuvers, and we have to kind of keep the aircraft level, because they're doing they're cutting, or they're doing something, or they're drilling during a blood transfusion, that you've got to try and you don't want to be rocking the aircraft too much. But you start to hear in their voice inflection that their breathing might get more rapid, or a little more high pitched and a little more frantic, and your job's to help talk them down. Like it's just like when you're dealing again in that hostage situation or things like that. Like you want to bring people back down to a level, and slowing your voice down and being kind of a little more low on the tonnage. Helps bring them down. Or when you're talking to the ground agency that's that has the casualty, and they're in the middle of they're in the middle of an ambush or a firefight, and they're yelling at you that you got to get here now, and you're talking to them that you're on your way. So things like that, you just got to make sure you got to try and keep the situation in control as best you can, and not get worked up with everybody else. So
yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, again, like I'm relating, I guess, on the basis that I understand myself, and like from the corporate flight department side of things. We're not dealing with life and death. Hopefully, we will never deal with life and death.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, this is sometimes a thing that we have to teach people, either as younger pilots or dispatchers or anybody else that we work with. Is like slow down is almost like instinctual. Like it's not the thing you want to do. Like you almost want to go faster, trying to get things done. And I always find it's like when these things happen, when you feel like the pressure is mounting, whether it's from the outside or the inside, that you have like that pressure inside to try to go faster, to think that this is going to help, is to be like, the first person that's going to be like, whoa, slow down, like you said, take the breathing down, the voice down, and then like try to sort of permeate that coolness to everyone else, and realize that slowing down actually helps a lot more.
Yeah, you have to have a clear mind, and then up front manipulating the aircraft. Helicopters for us, it's micro movements.
Yeah,
almost every landing was a dust landing, and
wow.
Those are pretty dangerous. It can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
Not to mention, if there's enemy fire in the area or other stuff that can go on, that's a big thing. There was LZs that we would land in, that weren't secured, so they're bringing the casualty out and they're sweeping for mines at the same time. Wow. And it's just, you have kind of surreal moments where you're like, you don't stop to think, because again, you're so focused on flying the aircraft. Number one thing, especially in emergencies, fly the aircraft. That's what we always say, fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft. So
yeah. How did you find it, or how did you do it yourself, having to always be sort of on edge, right? Like there were times where like you said, you have to go from 0 to 100. You're at base and you get the call and you got to go. And once you're flying, with everything that's going on, your mind has to be so razor sharp, like focused and almost in the flow. Like you said, you get in that place. Well, I guess it's a twofold question. I'm going to start with, what did you find that helped you prepare, or sort of build a healthy mind, or a very strong mind in a way that will be able to take that sort of constant adjustment and a warping from 0 to 100 all the time, right? Because and then put your mind in a place where it's 100% focused and ready to, because you had to be performing at the very peak of your skill and of your knowledge, I'm sure, all the time, right? And it sounds like not only flying, but leadership, people, you were doing so many things every minute that passed. You're listening to your medics breathing, and that's coming in your ear as you're flying your helicopter, and you're thinking about that at the same time. And there's just so much happening in the same moment. How do you prepare yourself, I would say in an everyday sort of way, to be able to be at that place when you go flying for those few, minutes, hours that would be out of your rotation?
Yeah. Well, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't on the job training, but as far as, getting locked in, I think, of always being a competitive person, growing up, I embrace challenges, and it was, and knowing again, the mission that you're doing something bigger than yourself. I mean, that was all the motivation I need to get up and get locked in, and realizing the gravity of what you're doing, so that was something that, I think I just naturally kind of took to. Now I'd be lying if I said, everybody goes into those situations mentally prepared, to see the worst. I mean, you tell yourself and you brief yourself, and the training and the ramp up for all that stuff, you you train for that, but I don't think anything can ever prepare you for, seeing your first casualty or, losing somebody in flight, to casualties. There's nothing that can ever prepare, even if you've seen it before.
Yeah.
There's nothing that I think anybody can do to prepare themselves for that. But the military is fantastic about, reps and sets and just drilling the stuff over and over and over again. And each time as you demonstrate proficiency, more and more things kind of get tacked on. And I mean, to kind of put it in like aviation terms, I mean, like every year, we go to the sim, for recurrent, and that's where you face all the most catastrophic emergency procedures, right? And things start to compound as depending on systems, it can be a hydraulic leak, and then all of a sudden, loss of control, and then this and that, and then a fire, stuff that you hopefully never have to experience in the world. But you drill those things so that way, hopefully when if that situation ever arises, like enough about yourself, and you've kind of pushed yourself enough to kind of handle it. But again, everybody handles stress differently. Again, I don't. There's probably things that I could have done better to prepare myself, but again, I don't think you can ever prepare yourself for that level of stress and level of trauma that you deal with on a deployment. And like I said, hats off to our first responders at home. Medics, doctors, nurses, police officers, firemen, because that's about as close as you can get to being, I guess, in war and seeing that those atrocities happen in everyday life.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I like what you said a lot, like sort of embracing the challenge, but pursuing excellence, and whether it's like the day, like you said, daily routine, like a day in, day out, learning on the job all the time, but also, when it comes to time for training and practicing, like really pushing to. And I know, like you said, in the simulator, things get crazy, but that then is really the time to really like try to push the boundaries, because I guess we always have a dichotomy. You don't want to be like trying something new too much in the airplane and the helicopter.
No.
Realize it was quite a good idea. But no, that's really good. How did you find as a leader then? Did you ever have to sort of like get involved personally with your team and making sure that they were prepared for this sort of thing, or did you rely on them mostly to do that on their own? Like, was everybody more or less the same, sort of like type A driven? I mean, I guess nobody is exactly the same, right? So
no, and the beauty of the organizations within a unit, everybody has, you get to delegate authority. Even as the commander of a unit, you have platoon leaders, and then you have section leaders, and then you have somebody that's head of the crew chief, somebody that's your chief medic, and they have leadership underneath them. So just like in an organization or a business, that the CEO might not know exactly what's going on his frontline workers, right? You have to rely on shift supervisors, or let's say a factory manager, or something to that effect. You rely on those people to kind of relay up if somebody's having a problem, because they're the ones that are working with them on a daily basis. And I mean, you see people, because again, you're in a relatively small area. Our unit was split up amongst 4 locations. But when you're with your people, I mean, it's easy to check on people, but you really rely on, their immediate supervisor in the chain of command to kind of relay up any issues. And that just comes having unit morale and having that camaraderie and having that trust there, because again, when you're in combat there, again, like I think you'd mentioned earlier, I mean, I don't think I'd ever been at the peak of being technically and tactically proficient with everything. I mean, it's just a byproduct of the environment, because you don't really have distractions, you don't have internet, for people just to zone out and do everything online, at least where we were, so it's and everybody's deployment's different. Again, ours was a pretty unique situation, but it's, you really rely on your people and the trust there. And then if they need the help, you give the guidance, and if somebody needs the resources, you allocate appropriately. But it's getting down, talking to the people, and we did a great job of when the guys were working on the aircraft, if I had a little bit of time, you go over and you get the guys waters,
Mm-hmm.
change out rags or get them tools or something, and just to kind of chit chat and see how they're handling doing things. Even those couple minutes of doing something with somebody, can give you a tip off of how somebody's mental psyche is, or if there's something bothering them.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So you're really down there involved with the guys, and you really being in touch with the people too that you work with. So, um, if I were to take a different spin on this whole thing and sort of dig deeper into I'm going to call it liveware aspect of things. Again, this is like an old CRM term, but the personal, but like intrapersonal aspect of aviation safety or performance. And if we go beyond the mind into just the physical aspect of the body, have you ever found, I mean, you were under tremendous stress all the time flying there. Before, and I'm sure after, you feel completely drained and you have to kind of recuperate from that. But now that you're flying Part 135 or even a small airplane, I feel like it doesn't matter what you're flying, or if you're flying at all. It applies to so many other things in life. But how to manage like your food intake, your sleep. I mean, being out on a deployment, like it's not like you have access to gym all the time, or the best sleep ever, Marriott beds. Like you weren't racking up.
No, we were definitely not in the Marriott bed.
So I mean, I know that for me, like when I'm on the road, it's great. I get to look up Google the hotel list and be like, this one's got a great gym, good restaurants. I know I'll eat well and all this, but and managing myself when I'm on the road is a big part of my own performance. I find if I fly tired, I know I won't be at the top of my game. If I fly hungry, I know that I might get hangry. But even performance-wise, like how I eat, when I sleep, and especially flying long haul on the Global Express, it's the onus is a lot on us, the crew, to self-manage our rest, our food, our physical state, because it'll affect our capacity or capability to then fly the airplane, for 10, 12 hours, maybe, to be on the job for that long. And it might not be like a stressful, I don't know how long your sorties used to be, like your with the Blackhawks, but so it might not be like a condensed package of just pure adrenaline. And this one is more of a 12 hours of pure boredom. But nevertheless, there's so much, crossing multiple countries, you're landing in a different time zone, different time of the day, different weather, and being able to be mindfully present in the whole flight and from the beginning to the end. I feel like it starts way before the flight begins. Like the preparation for this is not only just airplane, like flying skills, but a lot more like personal preparation. Do you have any tips, like, or any things that you found worked well while you were on the road, even with like limited, tools at your disposal to prepare that way?
Yeah. First off, the adrenaline dump is absolutely a real thing. I mean, you get done with a flight, and you're drenched in sweat. You're taking off all your gear. I mean, the amount of stuff that we flew with was a lot. And then again, just when your adrenaline finally does come down, but there's not really any time to think too much into that, because everybody just goes back to resetting the aircraft. Your team, your family, you get that done. But as far as preparing before flight, yeah, we did the best we could with working out. We made sandbag weights, PVC pipes, pull-up bars, dip bars. We were able to make. Our headquarters unit was great about resupplying us and giving us some dumbbells and free weights to kind of help. And then fresh fruit and vegetables was a premium. We ate a lot of MREs, meals ready to eat. Beef jerky, dried nuts, things of that nature, food that would get on resupply, food drops. So, water, drinking Gatorades. I mean, you do with what you can. Again, it's certainly not ideal for optimum nutrition, especially when you're dealing with temperatures that are over 50 degrees Celsius. You're just trying to stay hydrated. So the sodium certainly does help. A lot of energy drinks. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of energy drinks that are consumed on a deployments. Again, which it's hard, from a civilian mindset, I think, to think like, how can you guys operate like that? I mean, you don't have a choice. I mean, that's the beauty of like the creed of, at least in the armies, like you won't accept defeat, like you always find a way to get the mission done. So, guys suck it up and deal with it and get the job done. But, for me personally, again, I tried to, cans and packs of tuna to try and get some good high protein. I can't tell you how many I would make, like a easy mac and tuna kind of
that sounds delicious, actually.
Mix there. Did that a lot, and beef jerky, just high protein stuff. And then again, whenever we could get fruits or vegetables, it was always at a premium. But yeah, working out, always made time to get some work in, and that's really for me to kind of, I think, get rid of, frustrations that we're building, throwing around weights and lifting weights and, elevating your heart rate in that sense was always a good release for me to come back and kind of refocus, even if it was for, 15, 20 minutes at a time. So.
Yeah. So it helped with the mental aspect of things too. Like that's good. And I guess, what you're saying, not making excuses for how little you had or resources you had, but instead, like, you use the term like suck it up, but I like it a lot because I think that now, I don't know if you find that way being back here, but I know that for myself, and I see it around like in corporate aviation. I know the airlines is the same, but we tend to get so complacent and comfortable with the things, the amenities that we get, that the moment that we don't get, a posh hotel, or that we can't get the food we were expecting, or I don't know, that the gym is smaller than we thought, all of a sudden we're like, you see people getting like upset or making excuses for not pursuing sort of like that edge that we need to get to be on. And would you agree that we have to be sort of comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes? Like we said, I feel like, the term suck it up would sum it up really well, because it's like, well, yeah, so what? Like, aren't we paid to be at that place? And if we're not comfortable all the time, or, don't have the tools that we use all the time, it's still our duty, I guess. It's the way that I see it. Like, it's part of my job, not only to know how to fly the plane, but to be physically able to do it to the peak, to the top, like, the best that I can, best of my abilities, like mentally too.
Yeah.
So did you find that would be true? Something that we could apply to, the civilian side of aviation?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in a sense. I mean, again, like that context for where we were, I mean, again, you don't have that option. You don't have that luxury. And then the civilian side, I mean, I do think it is easier to get complacent, especially in the world of business aviation, where we're, you're flying a Global Express, which is a, $50, $60 million aircraft. Yeah. So it's easy, in the level of professionalism, the way everybody, the suits and the ties and everything, it's easy to kind of fall into that. I certainly have an appreciation for when things are nice, and then, but when things kind of fall short of expectations, it's kind of hard. You kind of like, oh, I wish I would have had this, because, me personally, I know how bad things can get. So you're like, oh, I never want to be in that situation again. But, on the civilian side, on the corporate side, I mean, nobody's shooting at you. Nobody's dying in the back of your aircraft. You're not dealing with 80 million other stressors that are affecting you personally and professionally. Could you suck it up if it's at like a Courtyard Marriott as opposed to the JW? Yeah, you probably could. I mean, you still have clean water, a clean running water, clean linens to lay your head down at night. So yeah, I think it's having a mindset of gratefulness, and that's probably like one of the big things that I've really wanted to get better at this year is to have more of a, a thankful approach on things. Like I have to tell myself like, oh, I have to do this one thing, or I have to do that one thing. And as a business owner and an entrepreneur, like it seems like these are tasks that are just menial, and are like, oh, I have to do this stuff. But, I get to do this. I have the rare opportunity to build and grow a business. I get the opportunity to lead people and help them, create a career for themselves within the organization. That's stuff that, again, it's just changing your perspective, I think, which helps. And again, I have to do it to myself all the time because, again, I'm far from perfect from it.
No, I hear you. The gratefulness is like probably one of the biggest, most important thing that we can. I would think, like you said, this year of all the years, but I think that 2021 is going to be a place where there's going to be a lot of healing to be done, and a lot of people are going to be, questioning or bringing their whole life back into question, I guess, as to, well, what do I do now? I have so many friends who are looking for employment now because of COVID, but at the same time, it is so incredibly like encouraging to see, how many of these guys have such an attitude of gratefulness for everything that they have, and how that's like propelling them upwards rather than dragging them down.
Yeah.
And so hopefully this year brings a lot of things to be grateful for. But I guess in a word of closing, because I don't want to keep you too long, what would be, do you think, one quality, one aspect, whether it's a character quality or anything like that, that you would say if you meet a new pilot today, and this kid wants to be, he could be anything in aviation, but like, what would be the one word of advice that you could tell them, like, hey kid, I wish I knew this, or this is what I did, and I encourage you to do the same.
Yeah, because I've probably chased opportunities and things for the wrong reasons, and looking back, I think the one piece of advice, I think Simon Sinek most famously says this, like, start with why. Like, why are you doing this? And if that why is something that's, again, that causes you to get up in the morning, because again, it's not easy when you're jet lagged in multiple time zones, or you have to go in for more training, or you got to get in the books. Like, if your why isn't concrete to your core, it's going to be really easy for you to give up on doing. Like a lot of people, New Year's resolutions, I want to lose weight, just because they want to feel better or look better, right? But to the core, are they doing it for vanity reasons? Probably. If it's like, I want to live a healthier lifestyle, so I'm a better example for my children or for my significant other, or I need to I want to get my cholesterol level down so I can hopefully live longer, like things like that. Again, just I'm just speaking out of generalities here, but finding again why you're doing things. If you're just chasing money or a title or position, I don't think that's going to lead to happiness. Money certainly makes things easier, yes, but it doesn't make people happier. And you just, the famous line, more money, more problems. I mean, you just start to adapt, more things that get complicated. I think so. For young pilots, why are you really doing this? Is it because you want to travel the world and help people and create an awesome environment for those around you? Like, then go for it. But if it's just if you're chasing a position or the money, you might not find the fulfillment that you need, because there's plenty of quote unquote successful people, that a lot of people would probably look up to, but those people are probably some of the most miserable humans on the planet, just because they're not satisfied with who they are, what they had to give up to kind of reach those positions.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer
No,
to
that
a
was
very complicated answer to a simple question.
Start with why is absolutely true. I really love it, and Simon Sinek is an excellent place to start. I mean, I would recommend anybody watching this to look him up because he has some really good things to say too. Thanks, Chris. That was really good. I loved it. I couldn't have asked for a better conclusion.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the time today and chatting with you, and thanks for letting me share my story again. There's a lot to unpack there, but hopefully it was something that's of value for you and your listeners.